They dragged me out of the cell with my wrists still bound and shoved me through a corridor that smelled like ozone and something floral I could not name. I had spent 9 days in a Valanthe holding cell after our patrol got ambushed near the border, and I had expected interrogation, maybe a firing squad, maybe a slow death in some alien prison block. What I did not expect was a bath, clean clothes, and 2 guards who handled me like I was made of glass instead of meat and bone. My name is Luca Ferris, Commander, United Earth Naval Advisory Corps, serial number not worth mentioning, because none of that mattered anymore. I was a prisoner of war in the heart of the Valanthe sovereignty, and someone had decided I was worth dressing up. The corridor opened into a hall so vast it made my chest tighten. Columns of dark crystal rose hundreds of feet to a ceiling that glowed with shifting violet light. Thousands of Valanthe filled tiered galleries on both sides, their iridescent skin catching the light in waves of purple and silver. They were tall, most of them clearing 7 feet, with sharp angular features, and 4 eyes arranged in pairs that tracked me like predators, watching something unfamiliar enter their territory. The guard stopped me at the center of a polished floor that reflected my own face back at me. I looked terrible. Clean, but terrible. The bruises from the ambush had faded to yellow stains along my jaw, and my eyes had the hollow look of a man who had not slept properly in over a week. A sound moved through the crowd. Not applause, not jeering. Something between a hum and a vibration that I felt in my teeth. Then the crowd parted at the far end of the hall, and she walked through. Crown Princess Selyara Valkorin was not what I expected. The Valanthe I had encountered during the border conflict were soldiers, bulky and armored, and built for violence. Selyara was built like a blade, tall and lean, with skin the color of deep twilight, and 4 luminous eyes that burned gold against the violet. She wore no armor. Her gown was a cascade of dark metallic fabric that moved like liquid, and a thin circlet of white crystal sat on her brow. She moved through that enormous hall as if every molecule of air in it belonged to her. She stopped 10 feet from me and studied my face with all 4 eyes. The silence in the hall was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. Seventh Tactical Advisory Unit, assigned to the border station at Kessler Point. Captured 9 days ago during an engagement your side lost rather badly. Not quite a smile. You did not bring me here to review my performance, I said. No. She turned to face the assembled court, and her voice shifted into something formal and ancient. She spoke in Valanthi first, and then repeated it in Standard for my benefit. I invoke the Kelvarin, the trial of worth. I name this human, Commander Luca Ferris, as my chosen suitor. I stood in the center of it and tried to process what she had just said. Suitor? I said, but my voice was lost in the noise. The Kelvarin is our oldest law, she said. A suitor must defeat the crown's appointed champion in 3 trials. If you win, you earn the right to stand beside me as royal consort. If you lose, the penalty is death. I never agreed to be anyone's suitor. Your alternative is execution as a prisoner of war. The border tribunal has already issued the sentence. I am offering you a chance to live. Commander, I suggest you take it. The crowd watched me, the way you watch a small animal caught in a trap, with curiosity and without mercy. I want to speak with you, I said, privately. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. They took me to a chamber off the main hall, a room with walls of dark stone, and a single window that overlooked the capital city below. The city was enormous, all sharp angles and glowing spires, stretching to a horizon I could not see. 2 moons hung low in a green-tinged sky. Selyara entered alone and closed the door behind her. The moment the door shut, something in her posture changed. The regal performance dropped, and what was left underneath looked exhausted. "You have questions," she said. "You just announced to your entire court that you want to marry a human prisoner." "So yes, I have a few." She walked to the window and stood with her back to me. "My empire is fracturing, Commander. 3 noble houses are positioning to take the throne. Each has proposed a champion of their own for the Kelvaran, and each champion comes with political strings that would turn me into a puppet the moment the ceremony ended. House Severith, House Malhran, House Dothkari. They have spent decades building alliances, and any champion I accept from within our own political structure comes preloaded with obligations I cannot afford." "So you chose an outsider." "I chose a wild card. A human with no factional loyalty, no political debts, no connections to any noble house." She turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw something honest in her expression. Not warmth, not affection, but the grim resignation of someone who had been carrying something too heavy for too long. "I do not need a husband, Commander. I need a weapon no one saw coming. I need someone who will walk into that arena and make every faction in this empire realize they do not control the outcome." "I reviewed more than your combat recordings. I reviewed your career file, your psychological evaluations, your mission reports." It is not, but it is a start. Accepting the Kelvaran meant a different kind of death sentence, but at least it came with a fighting chance. Tell me about the champion, I said. It was the expression of someone who knows the odds and has accepted them. General Vorath Kale, she said, commander of the Sovereignty's Third Fleet, the most decorated warrior in Valanthi history. He has fought in 43 Kelvaran duels over the last 2 decades. He has never lost. No opponent has ever survived past his second trial. Who appointed him as champion? House Severith. He is their sword, and they have been sharpening him for this moment for years. I stopped pacing and looked at her. You are asking me to fight the greatest warrior your species has ever produced, in a trial designed for your species, under rules I do not understand, in an arena full of people who want me dead. If you win, Commander, you become the most protected man in the Sovereignty. No one will be able to touch you without going through me and every institution that upholds the Kelvaran. You will be safe. You will be alive, and you will have proven something no human has ever proven before. What is that? That your species is not the fragile, short-lived accident the galaxy assumes you to be. The city below pulsed with a rhythm I did not understand, millions of lives moving through patterns that had been established for millennia before my species learned to use fire. How many people have attempted the Kelvarin and failed? I asked. In the last century, 47. All Valanthi. All trained warriors from noble houses, with resources and support networks, and years of preparation. And I have 72 hours. You have 72 hours. She met my eyes, and something shifted in her expression. Not warmth. Something more complicated than that. I care, Commander. More than I expected to. But caring and having options are two different things. And right now, I am out of options. You are the last move I have on the board, and I need you to be enough. She left the room after that, and I was escorted to my quarters. They were beautiful. High ceilings, elegant furniture, designed for beings taller than me, a bed that adjusted to my body weight, and a window that spanned an entire wall. It was a cage, a gilded, magnificent cage. I stood at that window and looked out over a city I could not name, on a world I had never meant to visit, surrounded by a species that considered me somewhere between a curiosity and an insect. In 72 hours, I would walk into an arena and face a creature that had killed 43 opponents without breaking a sweat. The recordings Celiara mentioned were probably available somewhere in this room's data system, and I needed to find them before I did anything else. Information first, panic later. I did not have superior strength. I did not have their physical advantages. I did not have allies, resources, or time. The odds against me were so staggering that any rational assessment would conclude that my death was a mathematical certainty. But rational assessments have never accounted for humans very well. We are the species that looked at fire and decided to hold it. The species that strapped ourselves to controlled explosions and launched ourselves into the void. The species that crawled out of mud, learned to sharpen rocks, and fought our way to the stars against every odd the universe threw at us. They gave me a trainer the next morning. His name was Dreneth, and he walked into my quarters with the enthusiasm of a man assigned to clean a sewage pipe. He was older than the other Valanthi I had seen, with deep scars running across his face and down his neck, and one of his 4 eyes was milky and blind. He carried himself with the rigid posture of a career military officer. And he looked at me the way you might look at a particularly disappointing piece of furniture. "You are the human," he said in rough standard. "I am the human. You are small. I am aware." He circled me slowly, studying my build with undisguised contempt. The Kelveron consists of 3 trials. The trial of blade, the trial of mind, the trial of will. You must win 2 of 3 to claim victory. Each trial has rules older than this city. I am honor-bound to teach you those rules and prepare you as best I can. I want you to know that I consider this assignment an insult to my rank and my career. "Noted," I said. "Can we start?" Something in my tone surprised him. He had expected pleading, maybe, or fear. What he got was a man who had already done the math and moved past the emotional response into the operational phase. He started with the trial of blade. The rules were straightforward, and every single one of them favored a Valanthi fighter. "Your reach is inferior," Dreneth said, tossing me a practice blade. It was a curved weapon, about 3 feet long, that hummed with a faint blue energy field along its edge. Your strength is inferior. Your speed is probably inferior, though humans are faster than most species give you credit for. Your center of gravity is wrong for this weapon. It was designed for a body shaped differently than yours. What is the floor surface? What are the lighting conditions? What is the temperature? How large is the space? Are there any obstacles? Or is it flat? Drenith stared at me as if I had asked him what color the sky was on Tuesdays. Why would any of that matter? Because where I come from, if you cannot overpower your enemy, you change the battlefield. He did not understand what I meant. Not yet. Drenith was brutal and efficient, and he did not hold back. I was on the ground more times than I could count, bruised and bleeding from practice cuts that the training blade left as welts instead of wounds. But I kept getting up, and each time I got up, I asked a question. What was Vorath's dominant hand? Which of his 4 arms carried the primary weapon? How did he transition between offensive and defensive stances? Did he favor any particular finishing move? He does not need a finishing move, Drenith said. No one lasts long enough for one. But he has one. Drenith paused. A spinning decapitation strike. He uses it to end every duel. It is theatrical and unnecessary, but the crowd expects it. Theatrical. He demonstrates that they were never worthy of sharing the arena with him. Nearly 8 feet tall, 4 arms that each moved independently, a body built like a siege engine, wrapped in muscle and armored hide. He fought with a controlled ferocity that was almost beautiful, every movement precise and devastating. But I was not watching for his strengths. I was watching for patterns. And patterns existed in every fighter, no matter how good they were. Vorath always opened with a lateral sweep from his upper right arm. He always shifted his weight to his left side when pressing an advantage. And he always finished with that spinning strike, his upper body rotating, while his lower arms created a defensive barrier. It was a weakness, not a physical one, but a psychological one. Vorath had never needed to adapt because no one had ever pushed him far enough to require it. His style was perfected through repetition, not through adversity. He was a master of a game no one had ever challenged him in. The next 2 days blurred together in a haze of training, analysis, and pain. Drenith pushed me harder than any human drill instructor I had ever faced, and I responded by asking questions that confused and irritated him in equal measure. I asked about the composition of the arena floor. I asked about the weight distribution of the energy blades. I asked about the ambient temperature during matches and how it affected Valanthi muscle performance. I was training to fight like a human, which meant something entirely different. Valanthi combat was about direct confrontation, strength against strength, honor against honor. Human combat was about information, adaptation, and exploiting every variable the environment offered. On the third morning, Drenith caught me studying the practice room floor, pressing my boot against the surface to test its friction coefficient. but if I can force him to pivot quickly, the polish works against his mass. More weight, more momentum to redirect. Drenith stared at me for a long moment. You are planning to use the floor as a weapon. I am planning to use everything as a weapon. That is what humans do. On the second evening, Selyara came to observe my training. She stood at the edge of the practice room with 2 guards, watching as Drenith knocked me to the floor for the 20th time that session. I got up, adjusted my grip on the practice blade, and came at him again from a different angle. He learns quickly, Selyara said. Drenith grunted. He learns differently. I am not sure it is the same thing. It is better, she said quietly. After the session, she lingered while Drenith left to arrange the next day's schedule. I sat on a bench, pressing a cold compress against a bruise on my ribs, and she stood near the door with her arms folded. You are not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Fear, despair, perhaps anger. I was angry yesterday. Today I am working. She watched me with those 4 golden eyes, and I realized that the mask she wore for the court was not entirely a mask. The coldness was real, but it was not cruelty. It was the protective shell of someone who had learned very young that showing vulnerability in her position meant death. My mother held this throne for 38 years, she said. She was murdered by House Severith when I was 14. They made it look like a reactor malfunction on her personal shuttle. Everyone knows. No one can prove it. I have been fighting them ever since. I did not know what to say to that, so I said what was true. I do not know if I can beat Vorath, but I know I am going to make it cost him something. That is more than anyone else has done. She nodded once, and left. The morning of the trial of Blade arrived like a punch to the chest. I barely slept the night before, not from fear, but from the racing calculations in my mind that refused to slow down. I went over Vorath's recordings one last time, mapped every pattern, every tell, every fraction of a second delay in his transitions. Then I dressed in the combat suit they provided, a light armor that fit my human frame awkwardly, and followed the guards to the arena. The Colosseum was enormous, open air, with a pale green sky above and tiered seating that climbed so high the upper rows disappeared into haze. 100,000 Valanthi filled those seats, and the sound they made was a deep harmonic vibration that resonated in my bones. The arena floor was a circle of polished dark stone, about 60 meters across, with no cover and no obstacles, just flat, open ground. I walked to my starting position and looked across the arena. The far gate opened, and Vorath Kale entered. The recordings had not done him justice. In person, he was a wall of living muscle that moved with the fluid grace of something that had been killing since before I was born. His skin was darker than most Valanthi, a deep indigo that absorbed the light, and all 4 of his eyes burned with a steady amber intensity. He wore minimal armor, just enough to satisfy the ceremonial requirements, and he carried his blade loosely in his upper right hand as if it weighed nothing. He looked at me, and what I saw in his expression was not hatred or aggression. It was pity, the kind of pity a professional killer feels for an opponent who never had a chance. A ceremonial horn sounded. The weapons were presented on a hovering platform between us. 2 Valanthi energy blades, identical in design, curved and humming with that faint blue light. I picked mine up and tested the weight. It was too long for my arm length, and balanced for a Valanthi grip. The horn sounded again. The trial began. Vorath did not rush. He advanced with measured steps, blade held in his upper right hand, his remaining 3 arms positioned in a defensive lattice that covered his torso and flanks. His opening move was exactly what the recordings predicted, a wide lateral sweep from the right, designed to test my reaction speed and force me to commit to a defensive posture. I ducked under it instead of blocking. The energy blade passed over my head close enough to heat the air, and I used my lower center of gravity to dart inside his reach for a fraction of a second before retreating. It was not an attack, it was a statement. I am smaller, and I will use that. Vorath adjusted instantly. His second strike came from the lower left, a short, vicious jab meant to catch me during my retreat. I started moving. For the next 2 minutes, I gave ground continuously, dodging, weaving, using every inch of that 60-meter arena to stay out of his optimal striking range. The crowd grew impatient. They wanted blood, and all they were getting was a small human running away from their champion. But I was not running. I was reading. Every exchange taught me something. The slight hesitation in his lower right arm when he extended his upper body for a long strike. The way his footwork shifted when he changed direction, creating a momentary gap in his lateral coverage. The imperceptible forward lean he made before committing to a power combination. At the 4-minute mark, Vorath stopped advancing. He stood in the center of the arena and watched me with narrowed eyes. For the first time, his expression was not pity, it was assessment. He knew I was doing something, even if he could not identify what. I made my move. I rushed him, dropped my blade, and dove inside his guard with both hands open. Every instinct he had was calibrated for armed combat, and the sight of an opponent voluntarily disarming themselves created a half-second gap in his response. I drove my fist into the nerve cluster at the base of his lower left arm, the exact spot Drenith had shown me during a training demonstration about Valanthi anatomy. Vorath made a sound I had never heard from a Valanthi before. A sharp, guttural bark of genuine pain. His lower left arm spasmed and dropped, and for the first time in 43 Kelveran duels, the great General Vorath Kale staggered. For 30 brutal seconds, I pressed every advantage I had, targeting his weakened left side, forcing him to compensate with his remaining arms, driving him into a defensive posture he had never been forced to adopt. My blade found his forearm, drew a thin line of dark blood, and the crowd erupted in a sound I could not interpret. But Vorath was a legend for a reason. He recovered faster than any fighter I had ever faced. His upper right arm came around in a devastating strike that I could not dodge, and the flat of his blade caught me across the chest and sent me flying backward. I hit the arena floor hard enough to lose my breath and my weapon simultaneously. Before I could rise, his blade was at my throat. "Yield," he said. His voice was deep and resonant and completely steady, but his left arm hung limp at his side. I looked up at him and smiled. "You are bleeding, General." His eyes narrowed. He pressed the blade closer, and I felt the energy field singe the skin of my neck. "Yield," he repeated. "I yield." He withdrew the blade and turned away. There was confusion in it, uncertainty. The medics reached me quickly and helped me to my feet. My chest felt like it had been hit by a ground car, and every breath was a sharp reminder that I had just fought the most dangerous warrior in the Valanthi Empire. But I was alive. From the royal balcony, Selyara watched with an expression I could not read from this distance. But Drenith was at the edge of the arena, and I could read his expression perfectly. For the first time since we met, the old warrior looked at me without contempt. I had lost the first trial, but as the medics escorted me from the arena, I could hear the murmur spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. The noble houses were no longer laughing. The medics worked on me for 3 hours. 2 cracked ribs, deep tissue bruising across my chest and arms, and a laceration on my neck from the energy blade that they sealed with some kind of biological adhesive that tingled as it bonded. The Valanthi medical technology was impressive, and by the time they finished, the pain had been reduced from blinding to merely awful. Drenith came to see me in the medical ward that evening. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before entering, and when he spoke, his voice lacked the contemptuous edge I had grown accustomed to. "You did something no one has done in 20 years, he said. "I lost," You wounded Vorath Kale. In the trial of Blade, that earns a status we call Keltheron, worthy prey. That does not sound like a compliment. It is not. It is a warning. He pulled a chair over and sat across from me, his scarred face grim. Vorath has never had to take an opponent seriously. You forced him to fight, actually fight, for the first time in decades. He will not make the mistake of underestimating you again. Good, I said. That means he will fight differently. And different is something I can exploit. Dreneth studied me with his 3 good eyes. You are a strange creature, Commander. I am a human. We are all strange creatures. The second trial was scheduled for the following day, the trial of mind. Dreneth briefed me on the format while I ate a meal that tasted like sweet chalk and something vaguely similar to roasted almonds. Both competitors would command virtual fleets in a holographic war theater, facing a tactical scenario designed to test strategic thinking under pressure. A panel of 5 Valanthi admirals would judge the engagement, and victory was determined by objective military outcomes, not style or tradition. This is your ground, Dreneth said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like hope. You are a tactical advisor. This is what you were trained for. Valanthi fleet doctrine is what I was trained against, I corrected. There is a difference. Use it. I spent that night reviewing everything I knew about Valanthi naval strategy. Their doctrine was built around a simple philosophy: concentrate overwhelming force at the point of decision and crush the enemy through superior firepower. It was effective. It had built an empire that spanned 400 star systems, but it was also predictable, because it was built on a cultural assumption that strength should always meet strength directly, that maneuvering to avoid a direct confrontation was a form of cowardice. Humans had learned a very different set of lessons. Our military history was a long, bloody catalog of smaller forces finding ways to defeat larger ones through ambush, deception, terrain exploitation, and the ruthless willingness to sacrifice pieces in order to win the game. We did not fight with honor. We fought to survive, and survival had taught us things that honor never could. The trial of mind took place in a chamber deep beneath the Colosseum. It was a circular room dominated by a massive holographic projector that filled the space with a 3-dimensional representation of a star system, complete with planets, asteroid fields, and 2 opposing fleets. The 5 admirals sat on an elevated platform, their expressions unreadable. Celiara watched from a separate gallery, flanked by advisors. Vorath stood on one side of the projector, and I stood on the other. His injured arm was in a medical brace, and his expression was different from the arena. Focused, intent, he looked at me the way a predator looks at something that has proven it can bite back. The scenario was explained by the lead admiral, a female Valanthi with silver skin and a voice like grinding stone. An enemy force held a fortified position around a gas giant. The attacking force was numerically inferior, but had access to an asteroid field and 3 jump points. The objective was to break the siege and destroy or force the retreat of the defending fleet within a simulated time window of 6 hours. Vorath was assigned the attacking role. I was given the same scenario simultaneously, running a parallel simulation. We would each command our fleets independently, and the admirals would compare our strategies and outcomes. The simulation began, and Vorath did exactly what I expected. He marshaled his fleet into a concentrated strike force and drove straight for the enemy's center, using his heaviest capital ships as a battering ram to punch through the defensive perimeter. It was textbook Valanthi doctrine, aggressive, direct, and backed by overwhelming local firepower at the point of contact. His fleet took casualties, but broke through the defensive line and began engaging the enemy's command ships within the first 2 hours of simulated time. My approach was different. I split my fleet into 5 independent wolf packs, each one small enough to be dismissed as a nuisance, but armed with enough firepower to threaten isolated targets. I sent 3 of the wolf packs into the asteroid field on divergent courses, using the rocks as cover to mask their energy signatures. The 4th wolf pack I positioned near the far jump point as a visible threat, forcing the enemy to detach screening elements to cover it. The 5th group, my smallest, I sent on a suicide run directly at the enemy's center. What I was doing violated every principle of Valanthi fleet warfare. I was fragmenting my force, sacrificing concentration for dispersion, and sending ships on what appeared to be pointless diversionary runs. In Valanthi military doctrine, this was not just poor strategy, it was an insult. But I was not playing by Valanthi doctrine. The suicide group hit the enemy center and died exactly as expected. But dying was their purpose. Their destruction created a debris field that disrupted the enemy's sensor coverage for a critical 11-minute window. During that window, my 3 wolf packs emerged from the asteroid field on the enemy's flanks and rear, targeting logistics ships, fuel depots, and communication relays instead of warships. The enemy fleet was not damaged. It was blinded and starved. Without logistics support, their warships had 6 hours of combat fuel remaining. Without communication relays, their coordination collapsed into individual ship actions. And without sensor coverage, they could not track my wolf packs as they melted back into the asteroid field and repositioned for another run. Over the next 4 simulated hours, I bled them dry through a campaign of harassment, ambush, and selective destruction that targeted everything except their combat ships. By hour 5, the enemy fleet was intact, but functionally crippled, unable to maneuver, communicate, or sustain operations. My fourth wolfpack jumped in from the far point and offered terms of surrender. The simulation projected a 93% probability of enemy capitulation. Voroth's approach had achieved victory through brute force at a cost of 40% casualties. Mine achieved a superior outcome with less than 8% losses. The admirals deliberated for a very long time. It was also, by their standards, deeply dishonorable. I had treated ships as expendable tools. I had used deception and misdirection as primary weapons. I had refused to meet the enemy in direct combat, choosing instead to starve them into submission. The verdict came after 40 minutes of deliberation. The lead admiral stood and announced that Commander Luca Ferris had achieved a superior tactical outcome in the trial of mind. She then noted, with visible distaste, that 3 of the 5 admirals had filed formal protests objecting to the tactics employed. She called my strategy effective but morally repugnant. Selyara stood in her gallery. The Kelvarin measures victory, Admiral, not morality. Noted, Your Highness, the Admiral said through clenched teeth. The trial was mine. 1 loss, 1 victory. The Kelvarin was tied. The reaction was immediate and violent. Not physically, not in that chamber, but in the political currents that flowed through the Valanthi court like underground rivers. A human winning even one trial was unprecedented. A human winning the trial of mind, the test of strategic superiority, struck at something fundamental in the Valanthi self-image. They were the dominant military power in their region of space. Their fleet doctrine was the foundation of their empire. And a single human had just demonstrated, in front of their own admirals, that their entire approach to warfare had blind spots large enough to fly a wolfpack through. I could feel the shift as I left the simulation chamber. The guards who escorted me were tenser than before, their hands closer to their weapons, their eyes scanning corridors with a vigilance that had not been there that morning. Courtiers I passed in the hallways stared at me with expressions that ranged from open hostility to grudging fascination. A group of young Valanthi officers stepped aside as I approached, and one of them murmured something in rapid Valanthi that I did not catch, but the tone was unmistakable. They were afraid, not of me personally, but of what my victory represented. Two figures dropped from an overhead maintenance shaft, fast and silent, armed with short blades that glowed with the sickly green of a different kind of energy weapon. They moved with trained precision, landing on the balls of their feet and striking before the sound of their arrival had finished echoing off the corridor walls. My guard went down before he could draw his weapon, a blade buried in his chest, and the second attacker lunged for me. I am not a close combat specialist. I am a tactical advisor. But the human military does not produce officers who cannot fight. And 9 years of service in contested space teaches you reflexes that do not fade. I sidestepped the first thrust, caught the attacker's wrist, and used his momentum to drive him face first into the corridor wall. The impact stunned him, but the first attacker was already pulling his blade from the guard and turning toward me. Something large and furious hit the first attacker from behind. Dreneth. The old warrior had been following me at a distance, and he intercepted the blade meant for my chest with his own body, taking the cut across his shoulder before driving his fist into the attacker's throat, with a force that dropped the figure instantly. The second attacker recovered and ran. Dreneth did not pursue. He was bleeding badly, the green energy of the blade having cauterized the entry wound, but left the tissue around it blackened and raw. Dreneth, I said, catching him as he staggered. House Severeth, he said through gritted teeth. They are done waiting for the Kelvaran to resolve this naturally. The medical team arrived within minutes, and Dreneth was taken to the same ward where I had been treated the day before. I stayed with him while they worked, watching alien surgeons repair tissue damage that would have been fatal to a human, but was merely serious for a Valanthi of Dreneth's constitution. A man who had greeted me with open contempt 3 days ago had just risked his life to save mine. The corridor outside was filled with security personnel now, their footsteps echoing in patterns that suggested a full sweep of the surrounding levels. Too late to prevent the attack, but sufficient to ensure there would not be a second one tonight. Why? I asked. Dreneth stared at the ceiling. His 3 good eyes were unfocused, and when he spoke, his voice was raw. The medical machines beside his bed hummed softly, pumping regenerative compounds into the wound that had blackened the tissue across his shoulder and upper chest. I fought in a Kelvaran once, he said. 31 years ago. I was young and I was strong, and I believed that was enough. It was not. She died 7 years later in a political assassination. I have carried that failure every day since. Every scar I have earned, every battle I have survived, none of it erased the weight of that single loss. She trusted me to be strong enough, and I was not. He turned his head and looked at me. The intensity in his remaining eyes was something I had never seen from him before. Not anger, not contempt, but the naked urgency of a man who recognized his own pain, reflected in someone else's fight. Do not lose, Commander. Do not carry what I carry. I nodded. I did not trust my voice to say more. House Severith will face consequences for this, she said, but not soon enough to matter. The third trial is tomorrow, and they will try again if they get the opportunity. Then do not give them the opportunity. Tell me about the trial of will. She sat across from me, and for the first time, she looked reluctant. The trial of will is not combat, she said. It is not strategy. It is endurance of the mind. She explained it carefully, and as she spoke, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Both competitors would be subjected to a device called the Valcora, an ancient neural interface that reached into the subject's mind and extracted their deepest psychological fear. Not a surface fear, not something rational like heights or darkness, the thing buried deepest. The thing they had built their entire emotional architecture to avoid confronting. The Valcora amplified that fear beyond what the conscious mind could normally process and forced the subject to endure it. It was raw psychological endurance against your own worst nightmare. How long do most competitors last? I asked. The average is 9 minutes. Exceptional competitors have reached 15. Vorath has never gone below 18. And the longest recorded session? 24 minutes. The competitor survived but suffered permanent psychological damage. He spent the rest of his life unable to distinguish between memory and present reality. She paused, and her 4 eyes searched my face with an intensity that felt almost medical. I am telling you this because you deserve to know what you are walking into, Commander. The first 2 trials test what a warrior can do. The third trial tests what a warrior is. Many consider it the cruelest tradition in our civilization, I am one of them. Some competitors meditate, some seek chemical dampening of their emotional responses. None of it makes a meaningful difference. The Valcora finds the truth regardless of how deeply you have buried it. Because I already knew what the Valcora would show me. I had known the moment she began describing it. It would not show me combat, or death, or pain. Those things I had made peace with long ago. It would not show me the faces of enemies, or the memory of battles gone wrong. Those were experiences I had processed and filed and moved beyond. It would show me Marin, my younger sister, 17 years old the last time I saw her, standing in the doorway of our apartment on Earth, tears running down her face, begging me not to leave for deep space service. She was the only family I had left after our parents died when I was 22, and she depended on me in ways I refused to acknowledge because acknowledging them would have meant staying, and staying would have meant confronting a grief I was not ready to face. So I left instead. I chose the stars over the person who needed me most, and what happened after that was the thing I had spent 5 years running from. The reason I volunteered for the most remote, most dangerous border assignment the Navy had to offer. Not because I was brave, because I was trying to disappear. I sat in my gilded cage on an alien world and stared at the twin moons and understood that tomorrow, for the first time in 5 years, I would have to face the one thing I could not fight, could not outthink, and could not survive by being clever. and I would have to do it in front of 100,000 strangers. They were elegant, terrible things. Dark metal frames with neural interface crowns suspended above each headrest, trailing thin filaments that pulsed with a faint bioluminescent light. The Valcora devices. The crowd was different too. The roaring, bloodthirsty energy of the trial of Blade was absent. The spectators sat in near silence, and there was something reverent in the way they watched the preparations. Dreneth had told me that the trial of will was considered sacred, the oldest and most respected of the three trials, a test that reached into the core of what a warrior truly was, beneath the training and the weapons and the armor. I walked to the platform and climbed the steps. My ribs still ached from the first trial, and the bruises across my arms had turned the mottled yellow-green of healing tissue. I was not in peak condition, but physical condition was irrelevant for what was coming. Vorath was already seated. His injured arm was still braced, but his posture was rigid and controlled, every line of his massive body radiating disciplined readiness. He watched me approach with an expression I had not seen from him before. Not warmth, not friendship, but the honest acknowledgement of one fighter recognizing another. "Human," he said, as I sat down. "General, whatever happens in this trial, you have earned your place in this arena. I want you to know that." I nodded. It was the closest thing to kindness a Valanthi warrior of his stature could offer, and I understood what it cost him to say it. The ceremonial attendants positioned the Valcora crowns above our heads. The filaments descended and made contact with my temples, and I felt a tingling warmth spread across my scalp. The device was interfacing with my neural pathways, reading, mapping, searching for the thing I feared most. From the royal balcony, Celiara watched. Even at this distance, I could see the tension in her body, the way her hands gripped the railing of the balcony with enough force to turn her violet knuckles pale. The lead admiral stood and announced the commencement of the trial of will. The crowd could see our biometric readings on massive holographic displays above the platform: heart rate, neural activity, stress hormones, pain responses, all rendered in real-time graphs that turned the most intimate details of our suffering into a spectator event. They could not see the visions themselves, only we could experience those. Vorath went first, or rather, the crowd's attention went to him first because his reaction was immediate and dramatic. His vital signs spiked violently the moment the device engaged. His heart rate doubled. His neural activity surged into patterns the display flagged as extreme distress. All four of his fists clenched so tightly that the tendons in his forearms stood out like cables, and his breathing became harsh and ragged. But Vorath was a warrior who had endured pain as a way of life. Within 90 seconds, I watched his biometrics begin to stabilize, not to normal levels, but to a controlled plateau of managed suffering. He was doing what Valanthi warriors were trained to do, suppressing the emotional response, building a wall between himself and the source of pain, and holding that wall through sheer force of will. 5 minutes passed. His readings held steady. 10 minutes. 15. The crowd murmured in quiet awe. Whatever the Valkora was showing Vorath, he was enduring it with the grim, unyielding resilience of a man who had spent his entire life learning to absorb punishment and keep standing. 20 minutes. 23. His biometrics were strained but stable. The admirals watched with solemn attention. This was a performance worthy of the greatest champion in Valanthi history. The arena disappeared. The crowd, the platform, the chairs, all of it dissolved like smoke, and I was standing in a kitchen, a small kitchen, with yellow walls and a window that looked out onto a street I recognized. Oak Lane, in the town where I grew up. The counters were cluttered with the comfortable mess of a lived-in home, cereal boxes and a coffee maker, and a fruit bowl with 2 apples turning brown. She was looking at me, and her expression was the one I saw every time I closed my eyes, the one I had been running from for 5 years. "You are leaving," she said. It was not a question. "I have to," I heard myself say, and my voice sounded exactly as it had that morning. Steady, certain, wrong. You do not have to. You are choosing to. The assignment is 2 years, I said. I will be back before you graduate. She was right. She was 17 years old, and she saw through me more clearly than anyone I had ever known. The scene shifted. The Valcora was not content with the memory as it happened. It showed me what came after, what I was not there to see. Marin alone in that apartment. Marin struggling through her senior year without a family member within reach. Marin calling a contact number that routed through 3 relay stations and a military switchboard and reached my voicemail every single time because I was deployed in a communication blackout zone. Marin in a hospital bed. I did not know the details of what happened. The notification that reached me was clinical and brief. A family emergency report that arrived 6 weeks after the fact because of processing delays in the deep space communication network. The funeral had already happened. The apartment had already been cleaned out. The life she lived, the life I was supposed to protect, had ended while I was cataloging patrol routes in a star system whose name I cannot remember. The Valcora amplified it. Not the facts. The feeling. Every ounce of guilt, grief, and self-loathing that I had compressed into a tight, cold knot in the center of my chest and locked away behind layers of professional detachment and voluntary isolation. The device found that knot and unwound it, thread by thread, and made me feel the full, unfiltered weight of what I had done. I left her. I chose to leave. She asked me to stay, and I chose the stars, and she died alone. And no amount of tactical brilliance, or combat skill, or stubborn survival instinct could change that single, irreducible fact. The Valcora showed me alternate versions. Marin alive. Marin at her graduation, looking into the audience and finding my face. Marin at 20, at 25, laughing at something I said across a dinner table. Marin meeting someone, falling in love, calling me to share the news, her voice bright and excited, the way it used to get when she was happy. A life that existed in every universe except the one I chose. The device constructed each vision with surgical precision, building them from fragments of real memory and extrapolating forward into timelines that felt more real than reality, because they were what should have been. My biometrics went critical. I could not see the displays, but I knew what they were showing. Heart rate in the danger zone, stress hormones at levels that risked cardiac damage, neural patterns flagged as acute psychological crisis. The crowd was watching a human being destroyed from the inside out, and even the most hostile spectators had gone quiet. The medical team moved to the base of the platform, instruments ready, waiting for the signal to intervene. One of the admirals turned to Selyara with a questioning expression, silently asking if she wanted to end it. She shook her head. Not yet. And somewhere in the center of that destruction, I made a choice. Hold out against the pain through force of will, the same way you hold a defensive position in combat. Vorath was doing it right now, 26 minutes in, his walls cracking but still standing, his body rigid with the effort of keeping the darkness contained. I did the opposite. I let the walls come down. The grief hit me like a wave, and I let it. The guilt, the self-hatred, the bottomless ache of a loss that could never be repaired. I let all of it in. I did not resist. I did not suppress. I opened every door the Valcora was trying to break through, and said, "Come in." In Valanthi culture, this was unthinkable. A warrior in the trial of will showing open emotion was considered a sign of imminent collapse. The crowd expected me to break at any moment. But I did not break. Because the Veilcora had a flaw that its creators had never anticipated. The device was designed to amplify fear and pain, to push the emotional response past the point where the conscious mind could endure it. But amplification requires resistance. You cannot increase the pressure on something that is not pushing back. I was not holding anything back. I was letting the grief flow through me completely, feeling every edge of it, acknowledging every truth it carried. Yes, I left. Yes, she died. Yes, it was my fault. Yes, I have to live with that. Not survive it. Not suppress it. Live with it. The way a river lives with the stones in its bed, not by destroying them, not by going around them, but by flowing over them and carrying the shape of their presence forever. I was feeling everything. The device cycled through variations and alternates and worst-case projections, and I absorbed each one with the same devastating openness, and each one passed through me like light through glass. The machine had been built to wage war against resistance, and I had given it nothing to fight. The minutes stretched, 25, 27. On the biometric displays, the crowd could see something unprecedented happening. My readings were extreme, far beyond what any previous competitor had registered, but they were not escalating. They had plateaued at a level that should have been catastrophic but somehow was not. The pattern made no sense to the Valanthi physicians watching the feeds. The human's body was in crisis, but his mind was not collapsing. It was something their models had no framework for. Vorath broke at 27 minutes and 14 seconds. His suppression strategy, his walls, his disciplined resistance, all of it had held for nearly half an hour against whatever the Veilcora was showing him. But the device found the crack. The one thing he was refusing to feel. And it drove into that crack with surgical precision and shattered him. He screamed, a raw animal sound that echoed through the silent arena, and then cut off as the medical team deactivated his device and rushed to his chair. 29. I was just sitting with my sister. I am sorry, I said. She smiled. It was not the Veilcora's creation. It was mine. A memory so small and so old that the device had overlooked it. Marin at 12, smiling at me over a birthday cake, candles reflecting in her eyes. I know, she said. 31 minutes. The medical team deactivated my device. The filaments withdrew from my temples, and the kitchen disappeared, and I was back in the arena, in the chair, my face wet and my body trembling, and every nerve ending raw and exposed. The silence in the Colosseum was absolute. 100,000 Valanthi sat in perfect stillness, staring at the small human who had just endured the longest Veilcora session in recorded history. Not through strength, not through resistance, through something they had never seen before, and did not have a word for. Celiara stood on the royal balcony. When she spoke, her voice carried across the arena, with a clarity that cut through the silence like a blade. The Kelvarin is complete. The human stands victorious. I barely heard her. I was still in that kitchen, still saying goodbye, still feeling the full weight of everything I had carried and hidden and run from. But underneath the grief, underneath the raw, scraped-open pain of it, there was something else. Something I had not felt in 5 years. I was not numb anymore. For the first time since Marin's death, I could feel something other than the absence of feeling. It hurt. It hurt more than Vorath's blade, or the arena floor, or any physical wound I had ever suffered. But it was real. And after 5 years of carefully constructed emptiness, real was enough. They helped me from the chair. The medics steadied me on both sides, and I walked out of the arena on my own feet, past the silent crowd, past the stunned admirals, past the medical team working over Vorath's unconscious form. I did not look at anyone. I could not. The inside of my head was a landscape of broken glass and raw light, and it would take time to sort through the wreckage. But I was alive, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wanted to be. Dreneth, still recovering from his own wounds, found me in the medical ward and told me what was happening with the blunt efficiency I had come to rely on. House Severith has rejected the result, he said. They are calling your victory illegitimate. I was lying on a treatment bed with neural stabilizers attached to my temples, trying to convince my brain that the kitchen and the grief and the 31 minutes of raw emotional exposure were over. On what grounds? They have invoked an ancient clause in the Kelvaran Charter. Section 14, Article 9. That is dangerous. House Severith has mobilized their private fleet. 11 capital ships are in orbit as we speak. They have given Selyara an ultimatum: annul the Kelvaran and select a proper Valanthi consort, or face civil war. I sat up, despite the medic's protests. The neural stabilizers pulled at my temples, and a sharp pain lanced through my skull. How many ships does Selyara have? 5. And 2 of those are ceremonial vessels with minimal combat capability. So they have her outgunned. They have her outgunned, outmaneuvered, and politically cornered. 3 minor houses have rallied to her side, but their combined strength does not close the gap. House Severith has been preparing for this moment for years. The Kelvaran was supposed to be a formality, a way for their champion to legitimize their control of the throne through tradition rather than force. Your victory disrupted that plan, and now they are falling back to the option they always had in reserve. The throne hall. The court has been summoned. I dressed in the formal attire they had given me on the first day, the only clothing I had that was not stained with sweat or blood, and walked through corridors that felt different than they had 3 days ago. The guards who had once watched me with suspicion now looked at me with something I could not quite identify. Not respect, exactly. More like uncertainty. They did not know what I was anymore, and that made them nervous. The throne hall was packed. Every seat in the tiered galleries was filled, and the floor was crowded with representatives from every noble house, military officers, court officials, and a cluster of diplomats from species I did not recognize. The air was thick with tension, the kind of electric, pre-storm pressure that I had felt before, usually right before a battle. Selyara stood at the center of the hall, on the raised platform where the throne sat. She was not sitting in it. She was standing in front of it, which I would later learn was a deliberate choice, loaded with symbolic meaning. Standing before the throne meant she was speaking as the heir, not as the monarch. She was defending her right to the crown, not exercising its power. The head of House Severith stood across from her. His name was Lord Catherine Val Severith, and he was everything I expected from the man who had orchestrated the assassination attempt and the fleet mobilization. Tall even for a Valanthe, with pale blue skin and 4 eyes that were cold and flat and devoid of anything resembling warmth. He spoke with the polished confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. "The charter is clear, Your Highness," Catherine was saying as I entered the hall. "The Kelveran was designed for Valanthe suitors. The human is not Valanthe. His victory, however impressive, cannot be recognized under the law. The charter does not specify species, Lord Catherine. It specifies that the suitor must be named by the crown and must defeat the appointed champion. Both conditions have been met." "What I understand," Selyara said, and her voice dropped to a register that made the nearest courtiers take a step back, "is that House Severith has spent 20 years positioning itself to control the throne. Your champion was supposed to win. Your political allies were supposed to fall into line. Your fleet was supposed to guarantee the outcome. And now a single human has dismantled every one of those assumptions, and you are scrambling to find a legal technicality to erase what happened in that arena." A murmur moved through the crowd. Selyara was not playing diplomatic games. She was calling Catherine out in front of the entire court, and the directness of it was shocking even by Valanthe standards. Catherine's expression hardened. "I am offering you a choice, Your Highness. Annul the Kelvaran, select a proper consort from the established houses, and preserve the stability of the sovereignty. Or cling to this farce and watch your empire tear itself apart." Heads turned. 100 conversations died. The human who had won the Kelvaran was walking toward the throne platform uninvited, and nobody knew what to do about it. "Commander Ferris," Catherine said, his cold eyes settling on me. "This is a matter for Valanthe courts. You have no standing here." "I have exactly the standing your own traditions gave me." I had addressed military briefings, strategic councils, and emergency war rooms. I had never addressed an alien civilization that considered my species a footnote in galactic history. Princess Selyara offered me a chance to fight for my life, and I took it. I did not fight for your throne. I did not fight for political power or influence. I fought because dying on my knees was not acceptable to me, and your traditions offered a way to die on my feet instead. I paused and let the silence settle. Your champion, General Vorath Kale, gave me the most honest fight of my life. He is the finest warrior I have ever faced, and I mean that without reservation. Your trial of mine showed me that your strategic traditions, while different from mine, are built on principles that deserve respect. and your trial of will showed me something about myself that I had been hiding from for years. She bet everything, her crown, her legacy, the future of her empire, on the idea that strength does not always look the way you expect it to, that an outsider with no allies, no advantages, and no reason to care about your politics could walk into the most sacred tradition your civilization possesses and prove something worth proving. She was right. Not because I am special, because humans have spent our entire history being underestimated, and we have turned that underestimation into the greatest weapon in our arsenal. The crowd was silent. Not the hostile silence of a few minutes ago. Something different. Something listening. Every eye in the hall turned. At the far end of the floor, a door had opened, and General Vorath Kale walked through it. He was moving slowly, the after-effects of the Veilcora still visible in the careful deliberation of his steps, but he was upright, and his expression was clear and focused. He walked to the center of the hall and stood between Catherine and me, and when he spoke, his deep voice carried the weight of a career that had defined Valanthi military culture for 2 decades. I have fought in 43 Kelvaran trials, Vorath said. I have defeated every opponent placed before me. My victories built the reputation of House Severith. My name is the foundation on which their political power stands. I have earned the right to speak on matters of the Kelvaran, and I will speak now. Catherine's expression shifted. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in those cold eyes. The human defeated me, Vorath said. Fairly, decisively. He won the trial of will through a form of endurance I did not know existed. He wounded me in the trial of blade, something no opponent has achieved in 20 years. His victory is legitimate. General, Hewer said sharply, this is not your decision to make. No, but it is my legacy you are trying to erase. Vorath turned to face Catherine directly. If you declare this Kelveran illegitimate, you declare every Kelveran I have ever fought illegitimate. My 43 victories are the legal foundation for dozens of political marriages, territorial claims, and alliance treaties that benefit House Severith directly. You cannot erase Commander Ferris without erasing me. And if you erase me, you erase the very power structure you are trying to protect. The logic was airtight. I watched it land on the assembled court like a precision strike, methodical and devastating. Catherine saw it too. His jaw tightened, and his four eyes narrowed, but there was nowhere to go. Vorath had taken the same political framework Catherine was using and turned it into a trap. One by one, the representatives who had been standing with House Severith began to physically distance themselves, moving across the floor to neutral positions, or, in 3 cases, walking directly to stand behind Celyara. The body language was unmistakable, even across species lines. The alliance was cracking. Catherine made one final attempt. And if we proceed with military options? The silence that followed was the sound of a coup collapsing. The Kelverin stands, Selyara said. Her voice was steady and formal and absolute. Commander Luca Ferris is recognized as Kelsorath. The Proven. Any challenge to this ruling is a challenge to the foundations of our civilization, and will be treated accordingly. Catherine left the hall without another word. His footsteps echoed in the silence, until the doors closed behind him. The ceremony that followed was elaborate and ancient, and lasted for hours. I stood where they told me to stand, spoke the words they told me to speak, and allowed rituals I did not understand to wash over me like water. Dreneth stood at the edge of the hall, his arm in a sling, watching with an expression that might have been pride. Vorath had withdrawn to a position of formal observation, his duty complete, his honor satisfied. When it was over, the court dispersed, and the hall emptied, and the weight of 3 days of combat and terror and grief settled onto my shoulders like a physical thing. I found a balcony on the upper level of the palace, a wide stone platform overlooking the capital city, and I stood there in the fading light of the twin moons and tried to remember what it felt like to breathe normally. Selyara found me there. She came alone, without guards or attendants, and stood beside me at the railing. The political mask was gone. What remained was a woman in her late 20s by human equivalence, exhausted and relieved, and carrying the particular sadness of someone who has won a battle they were not sure they deserved to win. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being more than I expected. I chose you as a disruption, a political tool. I did not believe you could actually win. I thought your death in the arena would buy me time to find another option." She paused. "I was wrong about you, and I am not accustomed to being wrong." "You were not entirely wrong. I am a disruption. I just turned out to be a more effective one than you planned." She almost smiled. "What do you want, Commander?" "Truly, not what the court expects, not what the Kelvarin dictates. If I could give you anything, what would it be?" I looked out over the city. The spires caught the moonlight and scattered it in patterns that reminded me, absurdly, of sunlight on water. The buildings were alien, the sky was alien, the air smelled like ozone and flowers, and 3 days ago, I had been a dead man in a holding cell with nothing ahead of me but a blank wall and a sentence. I left Earth because it reminded me of someone I lost, and I kept volunteering for the most remote assignments I could find, because distance felt like the only way to survive the guilt. I ran all the way to the edge of your territory, and then your patrol caught me, and a princess dragged me into a throne room and told me to fight for my life. I turned to face her. 4 golden eyes looked back at me, and in them, I saw the same exhaustion, the same loneliness, the same desperate need for something real in a life built entirely out of performance and obligation. This is the first place I have felt anything real in 5 years, and it nearly killed me, and I do not care. I am not going to promise you love or loyalty or a lifetime. I do not know what any of this is or what it becomes. But I am going to promise you this. I will stay, and I will try. She was quiet for a long time. The twin moons drifted slowly across the green-tinged sky, and the city below hummed with the low vibration of alien life continuing in its ancient patterns. That is enough, she said. For the first time in my life, that is enough. Full ceremony, every noble house in attendance, every diplomatic channel in the sector watching, Celyara ascended to the throne of the Valanthi sovereignty, with a human standing at her right hand. Not as a trophy, not as a weapon, as proof of a philosophy that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. I stood on that platform in formal attire that had been tailored to my human frame, looking out over a sea of alien faces, and I felt the weight of what this moment meant. Not for me. Every species in the gallery, every diplomat, every military observer, they were all watching a human stand beside the most powerful ruler in the sector, and they were all quietly, urgently, revising every assumption they had ever made about us. We were not the fragile, short-lived accident they believed us to be. We were the species that crawled out of the mud, sharpened rocks into weapons, split the atom, and crossed the void between stars on engines we built with our own hands. We were the species that felt everything, feared everything, and fought through it anyway. Because we refused, absolutely and irrevocably refused, to stay down. Vorath stood in the military gallery, his arm still healing, his expression unreadable. As I caught his eye, he inclined his head, a fraction of a degree. A gesture so small that no one in the hall saw it. I returned the gesture. Warrior to warrior, respect earned in the hardest way possible. Dreneth was somewhere in the crowd, probably scowling, probably secretly satisfied, probably already preparing a list of complaints about my posture and my grip, and every other thing he had spent 3 days trying to fix. I owed him my life, and he would never let me forget it. And Selyara sat on the throne beside me, her back straight, her 4 golden eyes scanning the crowd with the sharp intelligence of a woman who had outmaneuvered an empire to reach this moment. She did not look at me during the ceremony. She did not need to. The fact that I was there said everything that needed to be said. After the ceremony, after the crowds dispersed and the diplomats filed their reports, and the galaxy began the slow process of recalibrating its understanding of humanity, I stood alone on the balcony one last time. The twin moons hung low, and the alien city stretched to the horizon, and somewhere very far away, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, there was an apartment with yellow walls and a kitchen table where a girl with brown eyes once sat. I could not go back to that kitchen. I could not undo what I had done. But I could honor it by doing something I had been afraid to do for 5 years. I could stay. She always said I was better when I stopped pretending I was fine. She was right. She was always right. And standing on a balcony on an alien world, with twin moons overhead, and the future wide open and terrifying ahead of me, I finally let myself believe that being right was enough.